Looks like we're there, Susan.
Hi there. All set, Jackie?
I think so.
Welcome to Jackie McMillan's webinar, Autism Essentials. My name is Susan Watts. I'm with the Autism Intervention Clinic in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And Jackie and I have been having a great time working together for almost 4 years now. We used to give physical seminars and webinars and presentations, and we still do that. But we wanted to reach a larger audience, and so about a year ago, we decided we would try out the Google On Air live presentations, and it has been quite a success. We've finally mastered it. So if any of you have seen Jackie or heard her presentations before, you'll know she packs a lot of information into this hour. And those of you who are watching her and hearing her for the first time, I think you're going to be very impressed with her depth of knowledge and certainly her passion for reaching out to people who are dealing with autism on a daily basis. So, Jackie, if you're all set, we'll get started.
Thanks, Susan. For those of you who don't know, it's been a real, it's been an incredible gift for me to get to work with Susan because while you may look at me and go, oh, this person doesn't have autism, I do. My brain still works very differently. There are some things I do quite well. There are some things that I will never do well that our culture expects everyone to be able to do. And being able to collaborate with others is one of the best ways for those of us in the spectrum to really get our gifts out in the world. So today I'm gonna zip quickly into the program because if I don't, we're not gonna get through everything I want to get through. So I'm gonna just pull up the slide share and double check with Susan that, oh, that didn't work. Let's try this again. Okay, how's that, Susan? Are we there?
It had the slide itself. Yes, there it is. It's okay.
Okay, good. All right, we'll dive in there. So today I'm going to do some of the things that I think are most critical for you to understand when you're dealing with autism. So let's just kind of dive into it. Right now, who's getting better? Because there are kids and adults in the spectrum who are putting in place certain things in their lives, and they are gaining health, gaining function, gaining quality of life, and stepping into their larger capacity to be of service to the greater community. So here's one study that was done. This is a huge one. 7,000 California children were studied from 92 to 2001. And in this study, about 10% of those who started out in the lowest functioning group moved into the highest functioning group by age 14. Now, what set apart those kids who, quote unquote, bloomed was that their mothers tended to be more educated and not minorities. Now, I have known dads who've done this autism turnaround for their kids too. And I've known grandparents, so don't feel like you have to be a mom. You can be a foster care parent. You can be an educator. There's a massive amount you can do regardless of what situation you're coming from. The thing is that what this tells us is that the families who are seeing these gains may not be receiving the services and the support that they need in order to thrive. And so let's have a look at some more of how you thrive. Well, we know that early support can make a big difference. In a small British study, and there's lots of these little studies all over the place, they study children over the course of 3 to 5 years, and what they see is that about 20% improve enough that they no longer fit the diagnostic criteria for autism. Well, there's a little challenge for that. The diagnostic criteria are based on surface things like how well we behave and how well we communicate, and when you actually look at autism, these behaviors, these emotions, these cognitive abilities, these physical abilities all depend on underlying physical health. And some of these kids their health is restored, but because their brain developed differently, they still have an autistic mind. So the behavioral features of autism weren't reversed. They waxed and waned according to the health of the person with autism. So it's like the moon. It depends on what circumstances you're in, how much of you can express. Now, there are autism interventions that cause more harm than good. And just so Susan was warning me about the word iatrogenic. I will include those big words because I want you to understand them, but really I'm translating everything into ordinary plain language so that you can run with what you're getting. But I want you to know just a little bit about these interventions that cause more harm than good. Drugs will often take our bodies further off balance because our metabolism, our health is already off balance. And drugs are all toxic to the body in that they push the body in a particular direction, and they require extra effort of liver and kidneys and gut and so on to remove those compounds from the body. And sometimes drugs can cause a health and functional crash. So I really encourage you to be very, very cautious with drugs, especially with those of us in the spectrum. Second, there are pet training techniques that are rote, and for those of us with autism, we have very high IQ. There are some, like Fragile X syndrome and Downs. There's some co-diagnoses where you do have some mental impairment. But for straight autism, what they're finding is, well, we'll get there. We're smart. We're just having some real communication problems. So at best, these rote techniques are boring, and at worst, they will disengage a child. Christine Barnett wrote about her experience with her son, Jacob, who's now, he's in his mid-teens, and he's one of the premier astrophysicists in the world. And she had him in treatment after therapy, and he had virtually no spare time from the time he got up in the morning to when he went to bed at night, and he was just disengaging further and further and further. When she stopped it all, and she said, you know what, I'm just going to focus on what really lights this child up, she turned it around for him. So be very careful with these rote techniques. And the other thing that I want you to know is electroshock and electroconvulsive therapies, which are not the same as electromagnetic treatments. They're in the spectrum, but they're using a huge amount of electricity, and they're often used for behavioral problems or for seizures. These can significantly reduce our already fragile functioning, and I very much encourage you to avoid these as much as possible. So autism is said to be very expensive. Now, that's a little contrary to those of us who found our own way out of the fog, but I want to give you some numbers anyway. There's a 2014 study published in the Journal of American Medical Association Pediatrics from Philadelphia. Essentially, if an autistic has an intellectual ability, lifetime costs can reach $2.4 million in the U.S., and for autistics without intellectual disabilities, the lifetime cost can reach about $1.43 million in the U.S. So, that would be a little more in Canada, a little less in the UK, but when we look at those numbers, the largest contributors to those total costs across all age groups are the special and extra education in childhood and the lost wages of parents. You don't have to be at home as long as you think you do. If you've got a child who's got really serious challenges, you can turn this around. So autism doesn't have to be this costly. This research made some assumptions that I don't believe are true from what I have seen and what is now showing up in the research. One of the assumptions is that autistics are going to recover minimal health and function, if any, and will not make a financial or service contribution. That's not true. Another assumption is that the therapies provided will be expensive and not very effective. We can do better than that. We know what helps. We know what helps some autistics and why, and we know what helps all autistics and why. And the third thing is, the third assumption of this study is that parents are not going to have access to the best information. So they're not going to be able to help turn around their child's situation quickly, and they're going to lose a lot more years of income than necessary. So if those assumptions are wrong, what's actually true? We know that parents with the right knowledge and skill see significant gains in their autistic child's function and health, and sometimes to the point where some of us can camouflage in ordinary socioeconomic activities. And many autistics find work and fulfillment even with significant impairment still. Now, the common autism therapies either don't identify or treat the underlying health problems causing autism, or they miss 2 of the 5 root causes. And the third thing is that the interventions which help all autistics, the things I'm going to talk with you about, these can be done in a home or a classroom. They can be done in a clinic. They can be done in a workplace as part of normal activities. What you know matters a lot more than how much money you have. Those of us in the spectrum are figuring out how to optimize our autism, often on a shoestring budget, using these techniques that help all autistics, plus some of the specifics that help some of us. We are supporting each other across cultures and continents through the internet, and we're achieving this better health and function as adults. This is not something that's age dependent. The development of our brain is happening just fine. Our ability to communicate what we're learning is what is really challenged. So because health can improve at any age, what you see are people whose brains have evolved very differently and are outstanding at certain ways of functioning. And I'll get into that. And there are advantages to these ways of functioning that the rest of the population doesn't have. So let's talk about some of the autistics who've optimized their autism. Temple Grandin has done a lot of optimization of her environments. She got a lot of parental love and attention from her mom. She had early speech and language training. She had lots of time to play. She had a profound connection with nature through her summers spent at her aunt's ranch. And she creates calm environments for herself. Deep touch therapy, the hugging machine that she created can be very soothing. And she got a lot of practical skills training around her interests. This is something that's very important for us. All right, well, what helps Satoshi Tajiri? Well, for those of you who don't know, this is the man who created the Pokemon game. And the Pokemon characters are actually based on insects that metamorphose from one life stage to another. And he had a profound nature connection as a child that he still sustains. He had a lot of parental love and attention. He had healthy foods. He had a great deal of support around his special interests. He grew up in a calm environment that was rural, and he had a lot of time to play. And he continues to have a lot of time to play because he's a game designer. All right, Donna Williams. Donna Williams was the first spectrum adult that I bumped into. And it was a profound relief to me to read her books and realize that I was 23 when I found out that I had autism, that it was autism that had been impairing my life and that I had been figuring out how to turn around myself. And when I read in the medical journals that the diagnostics of autism, I thought, oh, yes, that's bang on. But when I read the treatments, I was terrified at what they were doing to people like me in institutions, and I just thought, oh my gosh, is everything I've learned about what hurts me and what helps me wrong? Am I crazy? And when I read Donna Williams' books, I went, oh, I'm not crazy. There are other autistics out there who are experiencing the same things. Now, Donna her experience is a lot like mine. She was a do-it-yourself case. She came from a very rough home. I didn't. But Donna, when she left home, was able to access some really great, compassionate psychological support, which is unusual for those of us in the spectrum because it's so misunderstood, especially in women. And she was also able to access some health support, some very real health support for her gut, immune, and metabolic challenges. And what that's meant is that she's been optimizing her autism since she was an adult, using nutritional supplementation, her ability to follow her special interests, lots of sensory calming things. You'll notice she's got sort of purple-blue glasses on, and trial and error like me. Plus, she's a musician, an artist, and she incorporates a lot of playtime into her life. So what helped John Elder Robison? Now, this is a guy who is quite prominent in the music industry as an outstanding instrument maker for rock bands. And he grew up with a lot of parental love and attention. He had lots of time to play. He was encouraged to follow his special interests. He's very musical and skilled, and got a lot of practical skills training. And he's also into energy medicine, and I'll talk a little bit more on that, but essentially ultrasound, there are many different frequencies of energy that either hurt the tissues or help the tissues, and some of them can be used in specific ways to encourage health. So are autistics not making a financial and social contribution? Well, I would argue that we are when given the right support. And if you look at the history of humanity, even though autism has been skyrocketing recently in terms of the numbers all around the world, there are autistic behaviors from our past that would likely have, there are people who would likely have been diagnosed as having autism. Hildegard of Bingen, Albert Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci. These are people who excelled in their time because of their problem-solving gifts that were so far and beyond what was normal in the rest of the population. So over 20 years ago, when I started trying to change the path, change people's understanding of autism and what they were doing to try to make a positive difference, I had people get really angry with me because they looked at me. I mean, I drove a car, I paid my own way through university, and they're like, my child is nothing like you. My child barely speaks or doesn't speak at all. And, and they couldn't make the connection that I had seen a huge amount of improvement through my life. And most of that improvement happened after I turned 11 years old. At 11, I went to a summer camp for 1 month, and it was a wilderness canoe tripping summer camp in Northern Ontario. And for that 1 month, I saw my pain levels drop. I saw my ability to learn and understand things go up and up and up. My emotions had been so tumultuous, and they just smoothed out gradually. And I realized that it didn't have to hurt to eat food, to digest food. I had no idea that digestion didn't have to be this constant grinding pain. Well, within 2 days of coming back to my normal inner city environment, very sensory overstimulating, very toxic, I was back in the same level of pain and overwhelm that I had been in previously. And my emotions were all over the map. I could learn maybe 1 day in 10, and it was so frustrating. But I knew from that experience, there were environments that were helping me, and there were environments that were hurting me. And in that city, I began changing my environments to help me. And I had tremendous success. What changed for me when I started to do these things? Well, communication and emotional skill were way easier when I didn't have all of these toxins getting in the way of my brain functioning properly. I became fully verbal with good pronunciation. I have constantly been achieving better digestion. It's still improving. It's a hard thing to turn around when you're an adult. I healed my balance and coordination. I can do a yoga headstand now. My allergies are mostly gone. I usually sleep long and well, and I have good reaction times. Reaction times used to be so bad. My mom would try to teach me how to throw and catch a ball and hit a baseball, and she'd throw a ball to me, and it would hit me because by the time I realized there was a ball coming my way, I couldn't respond in time. Now, dyslexic, I'm still dyslexic, but I've learned enough tricks about how to orient myself in space that I would call myself ambidextrous more than dyslexic, in that I switch sides very easily. I will write a letter backwards or forwards. I mean, write a note to a friend, all in backwards letters going backwards. And I have friends, which is awesome. You know, this is something to live for. So how did all of these things change for me? Well, that was that key realization at 11 years old, that the environments around me could harm me or help me, and that I could tweak my environments. I could create environments that allowed me to thrive. And you can do this too. Now, what this did was it set me onto a life of ongoing trial and error. My whole life turned into a science project, and I am still living a science project. I am still trying new things and discovering what helps, what hurts, digging into the research to find out why. I began reading those medical journals in high school, and then that took me into 2 years of pre-medical studies. But in the pre-medical studies, I was meeting medical students, and all they were studying was diagnosis and drugs. And I would ask them, well, you know, in the medical journals, it talks about, you know, allergies being related to gut and being related to nutrition. And they're like, oh, no, that doesn't have anything to do. You know, no. And I realized that I wasn't going to get the help that I needed from the medical system. So I started networking with other people in the autistic spectrum. I got a degree in environmental studies. I've had a career in environmental health, and I've sampled many therapies and researched many more. So I've covered a few myths about autism, but what else might not be true? Well, is it true that there are more males than females, or are girls being missed? Is it true that it's a neurological disorder? Or is what's happening in the brain an adaptive response to stress or caused by challenges elsewhere? Is it true that we don't know what causes autism? Well, we certainly know what's been helping autism. And we have over 60 years of evidence of what helps autism that points very clearly at 5 causes that we are finally building up data that indicate that, yes, indeed, there are health indicators in autistic bodies that tell us that we do know what the causes of autism are, and there are 5 of them. So let's deal with these really lightly. I've got more of this in other presentations, but I can only cover so much today, so I'm just going to dip into this. We know that at the highest levels of impairment, the numbers are equal. We know that male and female brains are different, and that this impacts our behaviors. There are some indicators that women may be more genetically buffered from autism. Now, the whole role of genes in autism, I'll touch on that later, but girls compensate more. We camouflage better because of the way our brains work. Our brains are more tuned to social signal than men's brains are. Now, women also have a lot more difficulty accessing diagnosis. If they are diagnosed, on average, it's 2 years later than boys. There are also penalties for accessing a diagnosis of having a quote-unquote mental disability. I don't believe that autism is a mental disability. I believe that it's a difference. It's a difference in brain development brought on by very high stress during key developmental stages. Now, there are also gender differences in upbringing and in expectations, and this ties into that whole thing around male and female brains being different. You can change how male or female a brain is by how you bring a child up. Now, the highest levels of impairment, you find that the numbers of males and the numbers of females in the autistic spectrum are the same. So where are the less impaired girls? Well, I would argue that they're being misdiagnosed. We have a lot of difficulty accessing diagnosis because unless we also have an intellectual or behavioral problem, we camouflage. So Summer Bishop from Cincinnati says, symptoms in girls are often different. Girls present with more subtle difficulties that are easier to miss. Marisela Huerta from University of Michigan, parents of girls often note that the ASD test questions don't capture what is unusual or abnormal about their daughter's play habits. And all of this completely ignores the stigma, the real challenge of having a mental diagnosis in our culture. Now, there are things that girls on the spectrum are being diagnosed as having that are not the correct diagnoses for them. These are things like fibromyalgia, bipolar, eating disorder, obsessive-compulsive disorder, anxiety and panic disorders, dyslexia, ADHD, sensory integration disorders. But when these women bump into research on autism, they self-identify. They say, wait, that's me. All right. Is it a neurological disorder? Well, when you look at autistics, our intelligence is average or higher in some very key areas. We have very high inflammation in our brains, but that's coming from problems somewhere else in the body, usually the gut. We have chemistry differences in the brain, but that's often also because we don't have enough of the right nutrients in our system, usually also sourced from either problems in the gut or too many toxins in our system. We have chemistry differences. Sorry, I said that. We have altered cerebral blood flow. Now, this is something that is often a result of nervous system challenges, and that can change when you address the nervous system. We have altered brain responses. Again, nutrition, chemistry. Size and morphology differences, well, there's some questions about those. And birth chemistry lag, this is something else that is just starting to come out from other mammal studies looking at birth chemistry and so on. All right, well, what about low IQ? Well, when you actually look at how an IQ test is done, they're expecting you to be able to communicate well, not to have any delays in your understanding of what's being asked, not to have any social challenges, and to be able to sit still and behave the way a tester would expect. Well, most children with autism aren't able to do that. So the IQ tests aren't capturing our actual abilities. Now, most autism tests and diagnoses focus on what autistic people can't do. But we are highly talented at tasks that involve pattern recognition, logical reasoning, and picking out irregularities in data or arguments. You want to find a mistake? We'll find it. You want to find a programming error? We'll find it. You want to find out where the stitch has gone wrong? We'll find it. There's a Harvard researcher named Isabelle Soulière who there's a quote from her, "Many of those who are considered low functioning can solve really complex problems if you give them material that they can optimally process." So if you give us the right environments and you give us a problem in a form that we can work with and understand, we usually figure it out. And it doesn't matter how low functioning you think we are. So is it really a neurological problem if the problem starts somewhere else? Our intelligence is holding despite our health challenges, and every single one of the problems in the brain is caused by something else somewhere else in the body, and by an impaired blood-brain barrier that allows these problems to cross in and affect the brain. So xenotoxins, toxins from outside the body, immune overwhelm from various viruses and health challenges and immune overreactivity and allergies, circulatory challenges, malnourishment, and endotoxins, toxins that we create inside the body, either because our body is using a whole bunch of back roads to get things done because it doesn't have the right nutrients to use the main roads, so the main roads are all blocked up, or from the really toxic creatures that set up housekeeping in our gut because we're living in a way that doesn't allow the healthy creatures to thrive in our gut, the probiotics. All right, unknown causes of autism. Now, this is a study from 2012 where 2 and a bit years passed when this study was published, and this was a collation of all of the research looking at health challenges in people with autism. 95% of the 437 publications found a link between immune problems and inflammation and autism. 100% of 115 publications found oxidative stress and autism. What that means is that we aren't getting enough antioxidants, which usually reflects a very high level of inflammation and toxins in our bodies. 153 publications, 95% of them found mitochondrial dysfunction. What this means is that our bodies aren't producing energy the way they should. So our brains, our cells, don't have the energy they need to get things done in a timely fashion. 89% of 190 publications looking at one environmental toxicant or another found an association with autism. Now, to add to that, the Autism Research Institute has not found a single autistic who doesn't have impaired detox and has a much higher body burden than the rest of the population of toxins. And these toxins clog up our system and make it difficult to go, if you try to go to the bank and you've got construction on the roads, sometimes you have to spend 2 or 3 times as long, lots of frustration, lots more energy, lots more fuel to get something done. That's what's happening in our bodies. Now, of all the studies that were looking at causes of autism, there were way more looking at genetics than all of the others combined. And there still has not been a clear genetic connection found with autism. What they have found is that environment is affecting genes. So alterations in gene expression are coming from environmental factors. And if you look at Dr. Bruce Lipton's work, it's not just nutritional deficiencies, toxins, immune effects, and pharmaceuticals. It's also the attitudes and belief of the people who are dealing with this gene change or this difference in gene expression. Now, Nardone and colleagues found, again, relationship to immune functions, our internal environment. Basil and colleagues found early life exposure to inflammation can be associated with gene changes in brain areas. And it's not the genes themselves that change, it's how the genes express themselves, what the genes direct the body to do. So why do autistics have 100% oxidative stress? Why is this association found in every study that looks at autistics and oxidative stress? Well, digestive challenges, increased vulnerability, higher toxic burden, immune challenges, malnourishment, and disrupted nerve and hormone communication. And I wish I could get into that last one a bit more today, but we gotta keep going here so I get through it on time. Let's look at gut and digestion problems. You might have noticed that last study, let me see if I can flip back. Oh, I don't have to flip back. They didn't touch on gut problems because they weren't looking for them. But if you look for them, there was a digestive review of gut challenges in autism in 2009, and they found that 43% of autistics have leaky gut. That means that undigested food gets into the bloodstream. Now, they found 93% of children who regress have lymphoid nodular hyperplasia. And that's something that results from food sensitivities, which in turn are a result of a leaky gut. Things get into the gut, they're not broken down properly because the wrong creatures are in there and they can't break things down. They perforate the gut lining because they're unhealthy creatures, and food particles migrate straight into the bloodstream, and the immune system goes, wait, intruder alert, and tries to fight food off because the food isn't in a form that it can recognize and work with. So chronic colitis. If you look at that image over on the right, there's an M that's kind of down in the lower half. And that M is the colon. And when the colon is inflamed, you'll find an inflamed colon in 88% of children who regress. Now, I've had an inflamed colon for most of my life. 69% of autistics have acid reflux esophagitis. Acid reflux, heartburn, when you burp, vomit, that kind of thing. 69% of us. Okay, this is a gut challenge. 41% have chronic gastritis. What that means is the stomach lining is inflamed. So over on the right-hand side, you see that half moon right near the top? That half moon is the stomach. When the lining of the stomach is inflamed, it hurts. 41% of us have that. 66% of us have chronic duodenitis. So down at the bottom of that half moon, you can see that curve that goes into the big tangle in the middle of the M. Well, that curve at the bottom of the stomach is the duodenum, and 66% of us are inflamed there. Now, we know that those of us with autism are seeing improvements on special diets. And there are particular diets that actually heal the gut. Now, it takes longer for those of us who are adults to heal the gut than it takes children. But what's really interesting is that when you put us on these diets, you don't just see improvements in gastrointestinal and gut symptoms, but you also see improvements in behavior and cognition, in our thinking and in the ways we interact with the people around us. Another neat fact is that fasting will reduce or eliminate seizures. So we know that there's a connection between toxins in the body and seizures. So if fasting reduces or eliminates seizures, then it's probably toxins in the gut that are causing those seizures in the first place. Now, we also know that changes in the diet also change the compounds that you pee out at the same time as they're changing your behavior. So we can actually look at what's happening chemically in the body as you change the diet and as behaviors change. So just a little bit more about digestion here. Nonverbal children are much more likely to have obvious gastrointestinal troubles. However, those of us who are high functioning, who go on this special diet that heals the gut, we see improvements. We see improvements to depression, to anxiety, to overall health indicators. Now, 80% of nonverbal autistic children who are treated with antibiotics see a temporary improvement in function and learning because the antibiotics kill off the bad guys in their gut. Well, when you go off the antibiotics, because you can't stay on them all the time because they're so hard on you, you see all of those gains being lost. Now, 2014 study found that anxiety, sensory overresponsivity, and GI problems are possibly interrelated. Now, studies are cautious with how they frame things because everything's a model, everything's a theory. What I'm telling you is what's working right now. So even though a research study may say maybe or possibly, what they're saying is that they're seeing a clear association, and so they want to get a lot more data on it. Now, 85% of immune function happens in the gut. So when you improve the gut, you improve immune function dramatically. Now, how do you know if the gut needs help? Well, does the gut make a lot of noise? Does it produce a lot of gas? Does it hurt so that child doesn't want to be touched? Or does it need pressure so that child is leaning over a swing or over the arm of an armchair all the time? Does that person show signs of dehydration or malnourishment? Does he or she start screaming and suddenly stop like a baby with colic? I have met adults who have that degree of digestive pain after they are fed things that are making them sick. Do they have nauseatingly stinky diarrhea or constipation? Do they have bad smelling sweat, feet, or breath? Even without these obvious things, it can be an issue. And when you go on these special diets that heal the gut, you know you're having an impact when you track the other symptoms. Intoxication. Autistics show a much higher body burden of pesticides and other agricultural chemicals, and these impair digestion, mimic hormones, and all of that. Now, I'm not using the word intoxication by accident. Now, we think that word kind of applies to alcohol, but really, It applies to all toxins. You have a distortion of sensory input, and you have greater function and lesser function depending on how intoxicated you are. And then you also have hangovers, and then you also have, for some of these toxins, they're actually addictive, so you get cravings for horrible things. So, heavy metals, they can impair digestion, they can impair energy production, and they can impair the way the body can fulfill other metabolic needs, the way it feeds itself and gets rid of waste products. Now, air pollution is a really interesting one, because you don't think that air is actually getting at the gut. But when you breathe things in, it's tracking directly into your bloodstream, and the bloodstream gets cleaned by the gut. Now, you also have particulate matter getting caught in the mucus in your nose, your breath pathways, and that mucus ends up in the gut. And so all of those particulate matters have to get dealt with by the gut. And what happens is that this stuff kills off healthy gut bacteria, and it makes the gut lining more permeable. And what most people don't realize is that indoor air quality is often orders of magnitude worse than outdoor air quality. We need to pay attention to this, because when you have impaired detox, the way autistics do, you take those toxins in and you start reacting immediately. The developing brain is exquisitely sensitive to chemicals, and when you look at certain key developmental stages, what you're seeing is autistics whose brains are being overwhelmed by, and whose development is being driven by chemicals. So what gets rid of this toxic burden? Well, I want you to think about, a tap that's constantly running. And that as that tap's running, you've got a cup underneath. Now, if you're trying to empty that cup, you've got to turn off that tap somehow. Because if you don't turn off the tap, that cup is never going to get empty. Because it can't empty itself. You have to kind of tip it or bail it out. So the three things you need to do to get rid of a toxic burden are you have to change the external environment so you're taking in less toxins from what's around you. You have to change the body's internal environment so that detox mechanisms can start to catch up on the backlog. And you have to support detoxification safely. There are unsafe ways to support detox or to force a detox that have killed children in the autistic spectrum. So I highly recommend that you stick with the safe stuff unless you are working with a professional who is very, very experienced in this. And you've got lots of referrals, and you have confidence. So how do you know if toxins are a problem? Well, there are no autistics tested who don't have impaired detox and a resulting high body burden. So you know that if a child is showing autistic symptoms, if an adult is showing autistic symptoms, toxins are a problem. But these are some of the things that can tell you what kind of impact toxins are having. If thinking is coming and going, if learning, memory, creativity are coming and going, if balance and coordination are there sometimes and not others, if immune response is there sometimes and not others, if reaction times are coming and going, these are toxin problems. And there are a lot more. Now, those of us in the autistic spectrum have under and over immunity. And sometimes, because the immune system is very complex and has a lot of different sections, one section of the immune system can be over-functioning and another can be under-functioning. If you're seeing early and frequent ear infections in any child you know, just let that person know. It's a warning sign. This person has immune challenges and is much more vulnerable to having that, what's called a regression, a slide down into much worse autistic symptoms. We know at this point that there are various infections and viruses that are being increasingly associated with autism. And there are, when you look at autistic bodies, you're seeing hyperimmunity and autoimmunity. And these are the rule, not the exception. My apologies. It's only going to ring 4 times. Sorry about that. I forgot to turn it off. And then to support the immune system, you really want to support the gut. Supporting the gut because 85% of immune function starts in the gut, if you help the gut heal, the immune system will heal. All right, under immunity, what do you see? Well, you're going to see environmental, pet allergies, other allergies. You're going to see asthma, warts, fungal infections, permanent sinus infections. You're going to see one cold after another. You're going to see fatigue and listlessness. Oh, somebody's really trying to get through. Sorry about this. Overimmunity. What do you see? Well, sometimes the immune system can stay on high alert. And if it does, if it's on high alert all the time, you're going to get a lot of redness, a lot of swelling, a lot of pain. And you know, the swelling can be in the hands, it can be in the lower legs, it can be all over the body. Yeah, I won't go into that. I go into that elsewhere. But you might never get colds or flu. You might have sore joints and muscles. It might be hard to get moving. But these are the things that you're going to see in the kids around you or the adults around you who have autism. Now, most medical doctors and naturopathic doctors stop there because that's what's in the medical research. Our medical professionals are trained to only look at what they're trained to look at. And so they don't look outside of gut, immune, and toxin issues for the most part. But when you have autism, those of us who are adults in the spectrum, and a very few brave researchers who are following us and what we're saying, there are two more underlying health problems for those of us in the spectrum. And I'm just going to touch on why I call these researchers brave. Now, medical schools are funded by drug companies. Journals are funded or run by drug companies. Health research, medical conferences are funded, sometimes run by drug companies. And so medical doctors who look farther than drugs for answers often lose funding and jobs because for immune, gut, and toxin issues, the drug companies can justify investing thousands, millions into research looking for a wonder drug. But the ones who are going further, you know, when you're looking at brain and nervous system compression or distortion or stress and trauma, you can't heal with a wonder drug. You're looking at different types of intervention. And so these are having difficulty getting funding for studies. However, the case studies, which are the reason that studies would be done in the first place, are just incredibly deep. Now, many of us in the spectrum experience a profound increase in quality of life and function when our nervous systems can communicate freely. So we need support to help free up the way the nerves can communicate. And stress and trauma. Almost everyone in the autistic spectrum is showing a much higher stress response than is healthy, than is known to be healthy in the rest of the population. And the impacts of this heightened stress response, which is usually a result of unresolved trauma, are insidious and pervasive. So the brain and nervous system. All right, we know that there are a number of therapies that help, but they help better if the body is being nourished properly. I mean, the body can't heal itself if it doesn't have the right nutrients. Also, if it doesn't have the right amount of water in it, which is another big problem for those of us in the spectrum. Now, we also know that electrostimulation and transcranial magnetic stimulation can help support particular areas of the brain to grow. Biofeedback can help with brain improvement. Brain plasticity games and exercises can improve the brain. All of these and more are making significant life improvements for autistics. So the nervous system is a likely place to look for issues. The thing is, if you try to address it, before you do the basic fundamental things that I'm going to tell you about, you're not going to get the results you could. So you're going to spend a lot of money on getting these interventions done, and you're not going to get the results that you could. Brain and nervous system. What do you see? Well, if there's anything wrong with the brain and nervous system, you might see pronunciation challenges, coordination challenges, lopsided walking or crawling, balance challenges, difficulty swallowing. And you might see some decreased mobility or decreased sensation in the lips, tongue, or jaw. And there are a bunch of different things that are tied in with brain and nervous system, but those are the ones that are kind of specific to brain and nervous system. All right, well, what about stress and trauma? Well, there's this the guy who has this 40-plus year career in neurology and rehabilitative medicine, and his name is Dr. Robert Scare. And is there a better name for somebody who studies stress and trauma? These are quotes from his book, The Trauma Spectrum. The cumulative experience of life's little traumas actually shape our personality, choice of mates, profession, clothes, appetite, pet peeves, social behaviors, posture, and state of physical and mental health. Big mouthful. He's also really getting at the place of where is this trauma coming from? And it comes from experiencing something stressful that you can't do anything about, so you feel helpless. And if that happens a number of times, you learn that you're helpless and you stop trying. And that's what happens in humans as well. Now, Catalano and Hartig have a 2001 study where persistent elevation of maternal serum, what this means is that when you're stressed out all the time, when you're pregnant, you get a lot more cortisol, and that's the stress hormone floating through your bloodstream. And this floats right through into the baby as well. There's no placental barrier for that hormone. And it has significant negative effects on the outcome of the pregnancy and on the health of the newborn. How can we de-stress our moms? This really needs to happen. All right, well, where is autism stress coming from? Well, there are external causes. Those of us in the spectrum have heightened senses. We're seeing more colors, which is why so many of us end up in art. We're hearing more sounds, which is why so many of us end up in music. If we're musical at all, we're likely to have perfect pitch. You'll find us scent. I mean, we can tease out what's in scents and flavors, so you'll find us in jobs that require heightened awareness of scent and taste and touch. Emotions. Emotions, well, you've probably seen this. If there's an emotional climate, we're probably expressing it. So if somebody's really, really upset, we're usually the ones who are expressing that upset. If people are really, really happy, we're flapping and bouncing off the walls. Now, I want you to just think about what we've created here in our Western society and how much you see in a day that's so painful and stressful and ugly that you turn away or you shut it out, or it's just, it's kind of bland and institutional. And then I want you to think about how often you see things that are so beautiful, so joyful, so pleasurable that you stop and you take in a breath and you're just completely uplifted by how glorious it is. I would argue that most of what we're creating in Western culture is by far on the ugly, painful, stressful end of that scale. And when your senses are turned on high alert, you are affected more by what's happening around you, by what you see, hear, feel, what you take in. And so beautiful things will transport us. We become ecstatic from beauty. And ugly things will depress us and make us feel helpless and destabilize and disable us. Now, there are also internal causes of autism stress. I mean, we're dealing with much higher levels of physical pain than most other people. And as a result, we have fairly high pain tolerance. Some of us notice pain a lot because our sensory system is turned up on high. But some of us don't notice pain at all. And it's not that we're not noticing that pain. It's that there's so much pain everywhere else in the body that some new pain just doesn't register. I used to come home in grade school with bruises all over me, and it would be like, well, where'd that one come from? And I'd go, I don't know, because I honestly didn't know. I wouldn't register. I was so dissociated from my body. We're in a lot of emotional pain. Emotions can be like this tidal wave that comes over you, and sometimes it's from hormones mimics in the things we eat, drink, and breathe, and sometimes it's just from the emotional climate around us that just sweeps over us, and we have no defense against us. We were rejected, we're tormented often, and this often doesn't stop in school. It's often a workplace thing as well. And for many of us, we're fighting off this message from our culture that we're not good enough, and we're never going to be good enough. Now, there's also a lot of mental stress because with the toxin issues, your learning capacity is highly variable. So for me, I would have one morning in 10 that I could really figure things out, and I'd pack as much in as I could because I knew it would be, you know, average 10 days before I could figure things out again. And in the meantime, I was faking it as hard as I possibly could, trying not to trigger people off to the fact that I wasn't getting it so that they would stop including me or put me in situations that were harmful or dangerous. Now, when you have this kind of inconsistency, the people around you can shame you and criticize you because they know you have the capacity to do something, but you're not doing it all the time. You're not demonstrating it. And that's really hard as well. Now, some people hear stress and trauma, really? And, okay, so here's some of the stats out there. We know that exposure to violence alters early brain development, especially the immune and stress response systems. And this is known from the studies on abuse that are being done right now. Now, mothers who've experienced significant trauma in childhood, so that's mental abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse, or sexual abuse, they have an altered stress response. And those who are the worst abused were more than 3.5 times as likely to have a child with autism. We've done animal studies that show that if the moms are under stress during early pregnancy, this predisposes their offspring to autism. So with any other insult added, their offspring are much more likely to show autistic symptoms. Now, here's a study that's just kind of nuts. You get to think, who figured this out? But prevalence of autism increases with the severity of prenatal exposure to major storms. So we know a whole bunch of things about what will help a child develop effectively and what will cause a child to have lots of trauma and stress. And unfortunately, Western parenting is, through the healthcare and through the ways we're encouraging parents to bring up their kids, we are causing stress and trauma. Now, what do you see? Well, you see emotional friability. Well, you see that in those of us with autism. You see meltdowns. Now, meltdowns are different from tantrums, and I go into that in some of my work. I just can't get to it today. You'll see withdrawn or suppressed behaviors. You'll see sudden, large behavior and or health changes if it's right after a trauma has been experienced. So when you see these changes in an autistic, if you have prearranged some kind of yes-no communication of some sort to help that person express what's happened, sometimes you can catch it in time, to get that child to a hospital, to get the tests and samples done so that you can prosecute. And there are people who have been prosecuted because they have sexually molested autistic children and adults. Now, if you see someone who's quickly upset or triggered beyond the merit of circumstances, that person is dealing with unresolved trauma. And chances are you've seen this in conversations you've had where you're in the middle of a talk with someone and you say something and all of a sudden they're not in the conversation anymore. They're really angry or sad or afraid, and it doesn't seem to have anything to do with what you were talking about. Well, that's got to do with getting triggered because there's a trauma in the past that hasn't been resolved for them. Well, why doesn't everybody know these things? Well, most spectrum adults aren't interested in hearing you're not good enough anymore, and so they're trying to live in ways that optimize their autism and that capitalize on their strengths. And optimizing their autism is something they do on the side. It's not their driving passion the way it is for some of us. Now, the few of us autistics who actually do the research and talk about optimizing autism have to surmount criticism from our peers, our own communication challenges, a medical system that overwhelmingly ignores our health problems and our voices, and a negative social climate which doesn't value our gifts and instead focuses on what we don't do well. Oh, wait, sorry, I gotta find there we go. Those of us who are adults in the autistic spectrum, many of us did our own autism recovery, and if we did it, you can too. Now, some people do it by having lots of money, but you don't need lots of money. Some people do it by getting fancy degrees. You don't need fancy degrees. Some people stay up all night to learn to read medical journals. You can do that, and I am not discouraging you from that. But what I'd like to do is tell you that I can save you a huge amount of time and effort in getting to the good stuff fast. Some of us deliberately compile information, and some of us make it easy for other people to learn. I want to break the stranglehold of this idea that you have to have a lot of money and you have to have a lot of skills in order to get an autism turnaround. The collective experiences of those of us who are autistic spectrum adults give you the lowest cost, minimal intervention results. So let's just zip back to cost here. Some of these costs are ongoing. Some of these are one-time. Beginner's driving lessons are $350 or more. If you want to make the most of your autism investments, you want to get those driving lessons, because those driving lessons allow you to step into a greater level of empowerment in terms of navigation and getting to where you want to go. Now, these other things, ABA support, occupational therapy support, naturopathic support, these are all ongoing costs, and they will cost you a lot more if you don't put these things I'm talking about in place first. I want you to start with what autistics know. And I have some online programs that I offer, and you absolutely get the best results when you have someone who understands to talk things through. There are discounts if you do those programs all at once in one row, and there are even bigger discounts if you do those programs with a relative, a friend, or a colleague, because we want you to succeed. So what are these online programs about? Well, the first program over on the left there, that one is about our bodies are designed to heal themselves and heal the mental and physical abilities that ride on our physical health. Now, some autism interventions only help some autistics because they treat the symptoms instead of treating the underlying health problems or the barriers to recover health. These interventions I'm sharing remove the barriers to healing so the body can heal itself. And sometimes you don't need any further support. But sometimes, if you need further support, these are the fundamental steps. And you're going to see little to no progress without them, but you're going to see incredible speed and ease of gains when you've got these in place. So the first series is about the body, minimizing toxins taken in, maximizing toxins moving out, optimizing the health of the physical systems in the body. The second series is about, it's kind of snakes and ladders. You know, what are the things that are going to best enable someone to move away from the pitfalls and to aim, to set goals for the things, the places that they're going to get the best results. So I want you to just sit back and think about what you're paying for that's adding to instead of subtracting from autism stress. I mean, if you're a parent, you've got endless therapeutic work that you're putting this child through. If you're an educator, you've got extra school supervision. There might be intensive training on holidays. You might be dealing with some harmful foods and drugs that you're just not aware of the impact of. And then to get to all of these things that are extra above and beyond, you've got driving, you've got research time. You might have resources, money that's going out. And are you happy? Because your level of stress is the biggest determinant of the happiness and well-being of the autistics around you. I want you to be able to get into the driver's seat. I want to give you the fastest paths to optimizing autism. I want to give you support in deciphering the symptoms that you're seeing. And I want to help you understand and avoid the pitfalls so that the people you're supporting can really thrive with autism. So there are two ways to do this. One of them is to sign up with the online program. Another way is to set up a phone date with me, and Susan will be mailing you both of those links. And these are ways that, you know, if you can get on the phone and ask me as many questions as you want. If you want to explore other ways to get help other than the online program, do that. But I want to wrap up with saying thank you. I mean, you're here today because you care enough about someone with autism or about several people with autism that you're taking time out of your life to learn and to make a positive difference. So thank you so much. All right, so I'm sorry I went slightly over time. I'm just going to get out of the screen share. There we go.
There. Jackie. I learned something new again today. You have some great information, and I'm sure that all the people who were on the webinar today learned many new things too. Thank you, and I'll be sending out those links to everybody. So I'll say goodbye.
I'll say goodbye too, and thanks again, and thank you, Susan. Really appreciate your support in this.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye then.